The clock on the kitchen wall ticked like a bomb, each second a reminder that I was running out of time. My 3 kids, Lila, 7, with her tangled ponytail, Max, 5, clutching his toy dinosaur, and little Sophie, barely 2, drooling on my shoulder, stared at me as I scrambled to find my resume. I was a 35-year-old single mom, abandoned by a husband who'd vanished with his mistress, and today was my one shot at a job that could save us from eviction. The job interview was in an hour, across town, and I had no car, no babysitter, and exactly $12.37 in my bank account. The bus fare for me and the kids would eat up most of it, but I had no choice. I bundled them up, their small hands gripping mine, and we rushed out the door, my heart pounding like a drum. The street was a blur of early morning chaos. Honking cars, chattering pedestrians, and the sharp November wind biting at our faces. Lila whined about her untied shoelace. Max dropped his dinosaur, and Sophie wailed for her bottle. I was one frayed nerve away from breaking. At the bus stop, a crowd pressed together, their breaths fogging in the cold. I fumbled for my wallet, counting coins, when I noticed him. A man in a frayed jacket, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and deep lines etched into his face. He was arguing with the bus driver, his voice low but desperate. "I just need to get to the hospital," he said, holding out a crumpled dollar bill. "My daughter, she's in labor. Please." The driver shook his head, unmoved. "Exact fare or you're off." I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the way his hands trembled, or the raw pain in his eyes that mirrored my own. I stepped forward, Sophie bouncing on my hip, and pressed my last few dollars into his hand. "Here," I said, my voice barely steady. "Get to your daughter." His eyes widened, then softened with a gratitude that hit me like a wave. "God bless you," he whispered, before disappearing onto the bus. The driver looked at me expectantly. I checked my wallet empty. My stomach sank. The kids were shivering, Lila tugging at my sleeve, asking why we weren't getting on. "We'll figure it out," I lied, my mind racing. The job interview was my lifeline, the only way to keep a roof over our heads. But now I was stranded with 3 kids and no plan. I turned back to the street, scanning for a miracle. A woman nearby, her coat pristine and her hair perfectly styled, glanced at us with pity before hurrying away. I wanted to scream, to demand why life kept piling on, but I swallowed it down. For Lila, Max, and Sophie, I had to keep moving. I started walking, dragging the kids along, praying I could make it to the interview on foot. It was 5 miles away, and my shoes were already pinching. Half a mile in, Max started crying. His dinosaur was still at the bus stop. I knelt down, wiping his tears, promising we'd go back for it later, though I knew we couldn't. Sophie was fussing, her diaper probably soaked, and Lila was silent, her big eyes watching me like she knew we were falling apart. I felt like a failure, every step heavier than the last. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Ma'am!" It was the man from the bus stop, jogging toward us, his breath puffing in the cold. You gave me your money." He held out a crumpled business card. "My name's Tom. I don't have much, but I owe you. Call me if you need anything." I took the card, too stunned to speak, and nodded. He smiled, a flicker of warmth in his tired face, before turning back toward the hospital. I shoved the card in my pocket, unsure what to make of it. The kids were still tugging at me, and the clock in my head was still ticking. I had to keep going. The interview was at a small accounting firm, a junior clerk position that paid just enough to cover rent and groceries. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. I'd spent weeks preparing, practicing answers in the mirror while the kids slept, trying to sound confident despite the chaos of my life. As we walked, the city seemed to close in around us. The skyscrapers loomed, indifferent, and the crowds pushed past like we were invisible. Lila asked if we'd have dinner tonight, and I forced a smile, saying, "Of course, sweetie." But the truth was I didn't know. The pantry was nearly empty, and the thought of another night of instant noodles made my chest ache. By the time we reached the office building, I was sweating despite the cold, my hair a mess, and Sophie's diaper had leaked onto my blouse. The receptionist gave me a skeptical look as I checked in, the kids trailing behind me like ducklings. "You can't bring them into the interview," she said flatly. I begged her to watch them for just 20 minutes, promising they'd be quiet. She sighed but agreed, and I handed Lila a coloring book, whispering to her to keep Max and Sophie calm. The interview room was stark, with fluorescent lights that made my stained blouse look even worse. The hiring manager, a stern woman in her 50s named Ms. Carter, barely looked up from her clipboard. "You're late," she said, her tone clipped. I stammered an apology, explaining the bus, the kids, the chaos, but her expression didn't soften. "We need reliability, Ms. Harper," she said. "Can you guarantee that?" I wanted to scream that I was trying, that I'd been reliable my whole life until my husband left me with nothing but debt and 3 kids. Instead, I nodded, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "I can," I said. "I'll do whatever it takes." She asked about my skills, my experience, and I answered as best I could, but I could feel her judgment, like she'd already written me off. When it was over, I collected the kids, who were miraculously quiet, and stepped back into the cold. The receptionist handed me a note. Someone had called while I was in the interview. It was Tom, the man from the bus stop. His number matched the card in my pocket. I stared at it, wondering why he'd called so soon. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to focus on getting home, but something told me to call back. I borrowed a phone from a kind stranger at a coffee shop and dialed. Tom answered on the first ring, his voice warm but urgent. "Ms. Harper? My daughter had her baby, a healthy girl. I got to be there because of you." His gratitude made my eyes sting. "I want to help you," he continued. "I'm not rich, but I know people. What do you need?" I hesitated, pride warring with desperation. "I need a job," I admitted, "and a way to keep my kids safe." There was a pause. Then Tom said, "Meet me tomorrow. I've got an idea." That night, we made it home on foot, the kids exhausted and cranky. The apartment was a mess. Dishes in the sink, toys scattered, a pile of unpaid bills on the counter. I tucked Lila, Max, and Sophie into bed, their small bodies curled together under a thin blanket. As I kissed their foreheads, Lila whispered, "Are we going to be okay, Mommy?" I forced a smile, but my heart twisted. "Always," I lied, praying I could make it true. Sleep didn't come. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Tom's business card. It was plain with just his name, Tom Reynolds, and a phone number. No job title, no company logo. I wondered who he was, what he meant by knowing people. Part of me feared he was just a kind stranger with no real power to help, but another part clung to the hope in his voice. I had nothing else. The next morning, I bundled the kids up again and headed to the address Tom had given me. A small diner near the hospital. The place smelled of coffee and fried eggs, and the kids' eyes lit up at the promise of pancakes, though I couldn't afford them. Tom was waiting in a booth, his face brighter than yesterday, a new energy in his posture. "My granddaughter's perfect," he said, showing me a photo of a tiny, red-faced baby. "Because of you, I was there." I blushed, waving off his thanks. It was just a few dollars, but he shook his head. It was everything. He leaned forward, his voice serious. "I used to run a small delivery business, nothing fancy, but I've got connections. There's a guy I know owns a logistics company. They need a clerk, someone good with numbers. I told him about you." My breath caught. "You don't even know me," I said. He shrugged. "I know you're the kind of person who'd give her last dollar to a stranger. That's enough for me." He slid a piece of paper across the table with a name, Richard Ellis, and an address. "He's expecting you this afternoon. Bring the kids if you have to." I stared at the paper, hope and fear tangling in my chest. Another interview, another chance, but also another risk of disappointment. The kids were coloring on napkins, Sophie smearing syrup on Max's arm, and I wondered if I could keep doing this, dragging them through my desperation, hoping for a break. The diner's warmth felt like a brief reprieve, but the clock was still ticking. I thanked Tom, promising to call him after the interview, and we headed out. The logistics company was in an industrial part of town, all gray buildings and rumbling trucks. The kids were restless, Lila complaining about her sore feet, Max whining about his lost dinosaur. I carried Sophie, my arms aching, and tried to ignore the doubt gnawing at me. Richard Ellis was a gruff man in his 60s, with a handshake like a vice. His office was cluttered with maps and invoices, and he eyed the kids warily as they sat in the corner with a box of crayons I'd begged from the receptionist. "Tom says you're reliable," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But you've got a lot going on." He gestured to the kids, and I felt my face burn. "I am reliable," I said, my voice firm despite the exhaustion. "I've been balancing everything alone for months. I'm good with numbers, I'm organized, and I'll show up every day." He raised an eyebrow, then handed me a test, a spreadsheet with errors I had to find. I dove in, my focus razor sharp, even as Sophie started fussing. Lila hushed her like a little mother, and I felt a surge of pride mixed with guilt. I finished the test in record time, catching every mistake. Richard looked impressed, though he didn't say it. "We'll call you," he said, which felt like a polite brush-off. I nodded, gathered the kids, and left, my heart heavy. On the way home, Max tripped and skinned his knee, crying so loudly that passers-by stared. I knelt to bandage him with a tissue, feeling like the world was watching me fail. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd blown it. Richard's words echoed in my head, and I wondered if I'd ever be more than a struggling mom in their eyes. But as I tucked the kids in, Lila handed me a drawing, a stick-figure family with me in the middle smiling. "You're the best mom," she said, and I broke down, sobbing quietly so they wouldn't hear. The next day, my phone rang. It was Richard. "You're hired," he said, no preamble. "Start Monday. And bring the kids. We've got a break room they can stay in." I nearly dropped the phone, tears streaming down my face. I thanked him, my voice shaking, and immediately called Tom. "You did it," I said, barely able to speak. He laughed, a warm, rumbling sound. "No, you did." Monday came, and I walked into the logistics company with the kids in tow, my heart lighter than it had been in months. The job wasn't perfect, long hours, modest pay, but it was a start. The break room had a couch and a small TV, and the receptionist, Maria, offered to keep an eye on the kids during my shifts. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The first week at the job was a whirlwind. I learned the company's system, sorted invoices, and caught errors that had slipped through for months. Richard grunted his approval, which I took as high praise. The kids adjusted to the break room, though Max kept sneaking out to explore, and Sophie's tantrums tested Maria's patience. Lila, bless her, took on the role of big sister with a seriousness that broke my heart. She was growing up too fast. At home, things were still tight. The job covered rent, but we were still eating cheap pasta and scraping by. I catch Lila hiding her portion so Max and Sophie could have more, and it killed me. I wanted to give them everything, but all I had was love and stubbornness. Still, the job gave me hope, and Tom's kindness lingered in my mind like a beacon. One evening, as I was leaving work, Maria pulled me aside. "You've got a good heart," she said, her eyes soft. "But you need help. There's a community center nearby, free daycare, food pantry, classes. I'll get you the info." I thanked her, swallowing my pride. Accepting help still felt like admitting defeat, but I couldn't keep doing this alone. The community center became a lifeline. They had a daycare where Lila could read, Max could play, and Sophie could nap in a real crib. They gave us bags of groceries, fresh fruit, bread, even meat, and I cried the first time I made a real meal for the kids. Lila's eyes lit up at the sight of apples, and Max declared the chicken, better than dinosaurs. It was a small victory, but it felt like everything. Tom checked in every few days, calling to ask about the kids or the job. He never pushed, never asked for anything, but his voice was a steady anchor. One day, he invited us to meet his daughter, Emily, and her new baby. I hesitated. My life was still a mess. But the kids were excited, so we went. Emily was young, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a warm smile. Her baby, Grace, was tiny and perfect, and the kids were obsessed, taking turns holding her tiny hand. Emily hugged me, tears in her eyes. "Dad told me what you did," she said. "You gave him more than money. You gave him hope." I brushed it off, embarrassed, but her words stayed with me. That night, as we walked home, Lila asked if we could visit Grace again. "She's like a little sister," she said, and my heart ached with love and guilt. They deserved so much more. Work got busier and I started taking on extra tasks, hoping for a raise. Richard noticed, giving me small nods of approval, but he was a man of few words. One day he called me into his office. "You're good," he said bluntly. "Better than most. I'm putting you on a project inventory overhaul. This big. You in?" I nodded, my pulse racing. This was a chance to prove myself, to build something stable for the kids. The project was grueling. Late nights, endless spreadsheets, and constant pressure. The kids spent more time at the community center, and I hated being away from them. Lila started acting out, refusing to do her homework, and Max's tantrums got worse. Sophie clung to me every morning, her cries echoing in my ears all day. I was stretched thin, but I couldn't stop. This job was our future. One night, I got a call from the community center. Lila had gotten into a fight, pushing another kid during a game. I rushed over, my stomach in knots. Lila was sitting in a corner, her arms crossed, her face defiant. "They said we're poor," she spat. "They said you don't care about us." I knelt beside her, my heart breaking. "I care more than anything," I whispered, pulling her close. "I'm doing this for you." That night, I lay awake, questioning everything. Was I failing them? Was the job worth it if it meant missing their lives? I thought of Tom, of his quiet strength, and called him. "You're not failing," he said firmly. "You're fighting, and you're not alone." He told me about a program at the community center for single parents, support groups, job training, even scholarships. "Sign up," he urged. "Let people help you." I did. The support group was a mix of tired, hopeful faces. Moms and dads like me, carrying the weight of the world. Sharing my story felt like shedding a layer of shame. They understood the guilt, the fear, the love that kept us going. One woman, Carla, offered to carpool the kids to daycare, and another gave me a lead on a better apartment. Slowly, I started to believe we could make it. The inventory project became my obsession. I poured everything into it, staying late to triple-check numbers, reorganizing systems that hadn't been touched in years. Richard started trusting me with more, even asking my opinion on hires. It felt good, really good, to be seen as more than a desperate mom. But the kids were paying the price. Lila's grades slipped, Max started having nightmares, and Sophie's vocabulary seemed stuck at mama and no. I tried to make it up to them on weekends, taking them to the park or baking cookies with the community center's donated flour. But Lila's silences grew longer, and Max's questions about his dad cut deeper. "Why did he leave?" he asked one night, his dinosaur clutched tight. I didn't have an answer, just a hug and a promise that I'd never leave. Tom became a regular part of our lives. He dropped by with coffee or a toy for the kids, always with that warm, steady smile. He told me about his own struggles, losing his business, raising Emily alone after his wife passed. "You keep going," he said, "for them." His words were a lifeline, pulling me through the darkest days. One evening, Richard called me into his office. "The project's a success," he said, a rare smile breaking through. "Clients are happy, and you're the reason. I'm promoting you assistant manager with a raise." I stared at him, stunned. The raise wasn't huge, but it meant a better apartment, maybe even savings for the kids' future. I thanked him, my voice thick, and left the office floating. I called Tom to share the news, and he insisted on celebrating. We met at the diner, the kids piling into a booth with milkshakes. Tom raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To you, Sarah Harper," he said. "The strongest woman I know." Lila beamed, Max cheered, and Sophie clapped, sticky with ice cream. For the first time in months, I felt like I was enough. The new apartment was small but clean, with a tiny balcony where Lila could read and Max could play. The kids started to settle. Lila's grades improved, Max's nightmares faded, and Sophie started saying new words. I was still exhausted, still stretched thin, but the weight felt lighter. The community center support group became my second family, and Carla's carpooling saved me hours. But life doesn't stay still. One morning, I got a call from Lila's school. She'd been caught stealing a classmate's lunch. I rushed over, my heart sinking. Lila was in the principal's office, her face red with shame. "I was hungry," she whispered. "You're always working." The words hit like a punch. I'd thought we were past the worst, but I'd missed how much she was still hurting. I took the day off, something I'd never done, and we went to the park. The kids ran ahead, laughing, and I watched them, guilt and love warring inside me. I called Tom, my voice shaking. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," I admitted. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're doing better than you think. But you need to be there, too. Not just at work." He was right. I'd been so focused on surviving that I'd forgotten to live. I started cutting back on overtime, prioritizing evenings with the kids. We read stories, played board games, even planted herbs on the balcony. Lila's smiles came back, and Max started drawing pictures of our new family, with Tom included. The job kept challenging me, but I thrived on it. Richard started talking about another promotion, maybe even a management role. I felt a spark of ambition I hadn't known I had. A dream of giving the kids a life where they didn't have to worry. But I was careful now, balancing work with time at home, making sure Lila, Max, and Sophie knew they were my world. One day, Tom showed up with a surprise. A tiny, plush dinosaur for Max, identical to the one he'd lost. Max's eyes lit up, and he hugged Tom so hard I thought he'd never let go. "You're like a grandpa," Max said, and Tom's face softened, his eyes glistening. I realized then how much he'd become part of our lives, not just a friend but family. The seasons changed, and so did we. Winter turned to spring, and the kids bloomed like the flowers on our balcony. Lila joined a reading club at the community center, her confidence growing with every book. Max started kindergarten, proudly showing off his dinosaur to new friends. Sophie's vocabulary exploded, and her giggles filled the apartment. I was still tired, still juggling, but I felt like we were building something real. Work was steady, and the assistant manager role gave me a sense of purpose. I started mentoring new hires, sharing tricks I'd learned on the inventory project. Richard even asked me to present at a client meeting, something I'd never imagined doing. Standing in front of those executives, I felt like Sarah Harper again. Not just a mom, but a woman with something to offer. Tom was there through it all, a quiet constant. He'd bring over homemade soup or help Lila with her math homework. The kids adored him, and I started to realize I did, too. Not in a romantic way, but in a deep, unshakable way. He was family, the kind you choose. When I told him about the client presentation, he grinned. "Told you you're a force," he said. But life has a way of testing you. One afternoon, I got a letter from my ex-husband's lawyer. He was back, claiming he wanted to see the kids. My stomach churned. He'd left us with nothing, disappearing with his mistress and leaving me to pick up the pieces. Now he thought he could waltz back in? I tore up the letter, but the anger stayed, simmering. I told Tom about it over coffee at the diner. His face hardened. "He doesn't deserve them," he said. "But you need to talk to a lawyer, Sarah." protect your kids. He gave me the name of a friend who did pro bono work, and I called her that night. She was kind but firm. My ex had no legal claim unless I let him back in. I decided then that he'd never hurt us again. The kids didn't know about the letter, and I wanted to keep it that way. But Lila, always perceptive, sensed something was off. "Is Daddy coming back?" she asked one night, her voice small. I took a deep breath, choosing honesty. "He might want to," I said, "but I'm keeping us safe. You don't have to see him." She nodded, her eyes old beyond her years, and hugged me tight. Work became my refuge. The client presentation led to a new project, streamlining the company's supply chain. It was a chance to shine, but it meant more hours. I leaned on the community center again, grateful for their daycare. Carla and the support group checked in, offering advice and encouragement. I started to see a future where I could afford dance lessons for Lila, a new bike for Max, maybe even a vacation someday. Tom invited us to Emily's house for Grace's first birthday. The kids were thrilled, piling into the car with presents they'd made. A drawing from Lila, a painted rock from Max. Emily's house was warm and chaotic, filled with family and laughter. Tom pulled me aside, his eyes serious. "You've changed my life, Sarah," he said. "Helping you. It's given me purpose again." I hugged him, tears in my eyes, grateful for this man who'd turned a bus fare into a bond. The project at work hit a snag. A major client pulled out, and Richard was stressed. He leaned on me to fix it, and I worked late nights, analyzing data and calling suppliers. The kids stayed with Carla, and I hated missing bedtime, but I knew this was temporary. One night, I found a note from Lila on my pillow. "You're my hero, Mommy." I cried, clutching it, promising myself I'd make it up to her. The project turned around, and Richard called me into his office. "You saved our bacon," he said, handing me a bonus check. It wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to open a savings account for the kids. I called Tom, my voice bubbling with excitement. "Drinks on me," I said, and he laughed, promising to bring Emily and Grace. The bonus check felt like a small miracle. I paid off a chunk of debt, bought Lila new books, and got Max a bike. Sophie got a stuffed bunny, which she dragged everywhere. For the first time, I felt like we were more than surviving, we were living. I enrolled Lila in dance classes, and her shy smile at the first lesson was worth every late night at work. Tom and Emily became fixtures in our lives. We'd have dinner together, the kids running wild while we talked about everything: parenting, dreams, the past. Tom told me about his wife, how her death had left him adrift until Emily's baby and my bus fare gave him purpose. I told him about my ex, the betrayal, the years of holding it together. It felt good to be seen not as a victim, but as a fighter. Work kept pushing me. Richard hinted at a full manager role, but it would mean travel, something I wasn't ready for. I talked it over with the support group, and Carla's advice stuck with me. "You don't have to do it all now. Build slow, for the kids." I decided to stay in my role, focusing on stability. Richard respected it, and I felt a new kind of strength, saying no to protect what mattered. One day, I got another letter from my ex's lawyer. He was pushing harder, claiming I was unfit because of my chaotic life. Rage boiled in me, but so did fear. I called Tom's lawyer friend, who set up a meeting. She was fierce, laying out my options. Fight for full custody, no contact. "You've got this," she said. "You're a rock." I filed the papers, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. Lila overheard me talking to Tom about it and asked if she'd have to see her dad. I sat her down, Max and Sophie playing nearby. "No," I said. "I'll keep you safe." She hugged me, and for the first time, I saw relief in her eyes. Max piped up, "Tom's better than Daddy." I laughed, but it stung. Tom was family, but he wasn't their father. Still, I was grateful for him. The community center threw a summer festival, and we all went. Tom, Emily, Grace, and my crew. The kids ran through sprinklers, their laughter echoing. Tom and I sat on a bench, watching. "You've built something amazing," he said. "A family, a life." I shook my head, but he stopped me. "Don't sell yourself short, Sarah. You're a miracle." Work settled into a rhythm. I was good at my job, respected, even liked. Maria became a friend, sneaking the kids' snacks and sharing stories of her own single mom days. Richard gave me a flexible schedule, letting me leave early for Lila's dance recitals or Max's school plays. I started dreaming bigger, a college fund, a house someday. One night, Tom showed up with a surprise. A family photo he'd had framed, from Grace's birthday. It showed all of us, me, the kids, Tom, Emily, Grace, laughing, messy, real. "This is us," he said, and I cried, hanging it on the wall. It was the first time our apartment felt like a home. The custody battle loomed, but I was ready. The lawyer built a strong case, using my job, the community center, and the kids' progress to show I was more than enough. Tom testified, telling the judge about the bus fare, how I'd given my last dollars to a stranger. The judge's face softened, and I felt a flicker of hope. The courtroom was cold, sterile, nothing like the warmth of our little apartment. I sat there, Lila's drawing in my pocket, Tom and Emily in the back row for support. My ex, James, looked different, older, thinner, his eyes avoiding mine. His lawyer argued he'd changed, that he deserved a chance. I wanted to scream, but I stayed calm, letting my lawyer speak. She was a force, laying out every detail of my life. My job, the kids' stability, the community we'd built. When Tom took the stand, his voice steady as he told the bus fare story, I saw the judge lean forward, listening. The ruling came fast. Full custody to me, no visitation for James unless I agreed. Relief washed over me, so strong I nearly collapsed. Tom hugged me outside, the kids piling on, oblivious to the weight of the moment. "You did it," he whispered. But it wasn't just me, it was him, Emily, Carla, Maria, the support group. I'd learned to let people in, and that had saved us. Life after the ruling felt lighter. Lila's dance recitals became the highlight of my week. Her spins and leaps a reminder of her resilience. Max started soccer, his energy boundless, and Sophie's chatter filled every room. I kept my job, turning down the manager role for now, choosing time with the kids over ambition. Richard understood, even offering to mentor me for the future. Tom and I grew closer, not as lovers but as something deeper, partners in survival. He'd bring Grace over, and we'd watch the kids play, sharing quiet moments of gratitude. One day, he told me he was starting a new business, a small delivery service, and asked if I'd help with the books. I said yes, excited to use my skills to give back. The community center offered me a part-time role, teaching budgeting classes to other single parents. It felt like coming full circle, using my pain to help others. The kids came with me, Lila helping with handouts, Max drawing on the whiteboard. They were proud, and so was I. One evening, as we sat on the balcony, the kids eating popsicles, I looked at the city skyline, glowing in the dusk. I thought of that desperate morning at the bus stop, my last dollars in a stranger's hand. That one act of kindness had rippled, connecting me to Tom, to Emily, to a community that held us up. I wasn't alone anymore. Lila leaned against me, her hair smelling of shampoo. "Are we okay now, Mommy?" she asked. I kissed her forehead, my heart full. "We're more than okay," I said. "We're home."